Welcome to the US Globe Weekly Water Cooler series. For those that are new, the water coolers are really a space for us to gather together and connect and share ideas in more of an informal setting. My name is Haley Wicklein. I work at the United States Globe office at the University of New Hampshire at our Leitzel Center. And I'm also part of the New Hampshire Globe team, and I'm going to be wearing my New Hampshire hat today to talk about our soil tent project. And I also wanted to introduce Joy and Nate, who are graduate students at the University of New Hampshire, and they helped us bring this programming out to students this fall. And later in the presentation, they will introduce themselves and share their experience. And we also have a number of members of our soil tent team with us today. So Susan Cox and Andy Coulter from the Forest Service are here, as well as Jen, the U.S. Country Coordinator, who is here listening in as well. So welcome everybody. If the part of the team and I'm missing anything, please don't hesitate to jump in, or if you have something to add. Before we get started, I actually wanted to just draw your attention to these soil murals that you're looking at on these slides. These are murals that each one represents a different habitat and what the soil looks like in each habitat. So I want you to look at this one on the left. I think if you can see my cursor, and actually just type into the chat, what habitat do you think this is an image of? So if you look at this whole image here, maybe I'll orient you to the picture. So can you see my cursor? Give me a thumbs up. Can you see this? Yeah. So this is actually right here. This is like the line of below this is the soil, and above this is above ground. And so Sarah says a pond. Does anyone else have a guess? Sorry, if I get quiet again, please just tell me to speak up. I got a forest. Any other guesses? This is interesting. We talked about this with our students as well, trying to look for some clues. So a wetland, yes. Andy, he actually knows the answer. So this is a wetland. We got these two little frogs here holding hands. We have some water. Probably some silhouettes of some plants here in the background. And then starting here is our soil underneath our wetland ecosystem. Okay, I'm gonna keep this going. We're gonna see how we do. So if you look at the center panel, so here again is the line between below and above ground. Does anyone have an idea what habitat this center one might be? Tracy says a forest meadow, mixed forest. All right, we're on the right track now. Okay, yes, this is a forest habitat. So we've got our deer. I think there maybe are some fungi here, some insects under the soil, and then these above ground are tree silhouettes. And then below ground, you're seeing sort of the different profiles of what a New Hampshire forest soil would look like. All right, really quickly, the last one, all the way on the right. Any guesses? Dave's backyard, grassland, mountain meadow. Yeah, so this is our meadow habitat. So we've got some grasses here above ground. You can see their roots coming down. We got a little bunny in its burrow eating a carrot. We have this kind of nebulous creature. We're not quite sure what that one is, but we like to make guesses about it. So I really just wanted you to focus in on these because these panels are a big part of our soil tent. And they also show the habitats that you would commonly find in New Hampshire. So as students go out with this program and they're digging in the soil, they'd probably be in one of these three habitats. Thank you for bearing with me on that one. So we're going to back up a little bit, and I just want to talk a little bit about what is the soil tent. So the soil tent began in 2016 with a youth engagement grant from the Forest Service, and it's a collaboration between the Forest Service, the White Mountain National Forest, New Hampshire Globe, and the Northern Arts Alliance, which is up in northern New Hampshire. And it's basically a 10 by 10 pop-up tent. So like you imagine at a farmer's market. And those 3 murals that we looked at form the panels, are printed on the panels of the tent. So as you walk into the tent, it's like you're walking underground and the soil is all around you. And then with the tent comes some bins, a kit that has materials for hands-on soil activities that are based on the Elementary Globe Scoop on Soils book. If you're not familiar with this book, it's about these 3 students and their dog has run away and they're chasing their dog through all these different habitats. And the dog is digging up the soil and they're making observations about these different holes the dog has made. And so there's this habitat theme and how does soil look in different habitats. And so we have geared our materials to a K-4 audience, but we've definitely had some inquiries for middle schools, and it really could be used even at a community-wide setting as well. And so the tent and these materials can be checked out. It's like a lending program, and they can come to your school or your educational setting, and you can use the materials. And so the tent really had 2 phases. And the first phase was just the development of the tent itself. And this happened through STEAM residencies at 3 New Hampshire schools. And this part of the project was really led by Andy. And this is, well, Andy here right in the left picture. And Andy is a soil scientist. He was at the White Mountain National Forest, and he's now in the DC office with the Forest Service. And he brought all of our materials and activities to the students. They dug soil pits, they learned and explored the soil together. And then after they'd spent time with him, they went in and worked with an artist in residence, Julie Putchin. And Julie worked with them to create classroom murals and individual artwork based on their observations they'd made out in the field. And Julie really focused in on details and making careful observations, and how both of those things are so important in science as well as in art. And so then she took their imagery and brought it back and created those murals. So some of the imagery you could probably tell came from students, and some of it she put together. And so that formed the walls of our tent. And then inside the tent, when it comes to your school, you have this whole big tent, and then you also have some of these Scoop on Soils books. There are a number of different exploration tools, meter sticks, magnifying glasses, the Globe Soil Color Book. There also are soil coring tools. So we have an auger and a small soil core and a shovel, and then materials to do some hands-on soil activities. So we put all this together, we printed the panels, we got the tent ready, and then COVID hit. So like many of you have dealt with, our project was put on hold for quite a while, and the materials sat waiting. And then almost a year ago, I started connecting with Ellen Irvin, who's a science specialist at our local elementary schools. And she was really excited about getting this programming into her school. And although we still aren't allowed in the school, this program was really nice in that the students could come outside to us. And so we were able to get out to these 2 different elementary schools, Mohermet and Mast Way. And while we were there, we worked primarily with 4th grade students. And we had about 45 minutes with each group. And so we would get half the class at a time, which is really nice. It's 10 to 12 students. They would come out. Nate and Joy did a really wonderful introduction about New Hampshire soils and solicited some predictions about what students would find and why does the soil look the way it does. And then they worked in teams and they got to try out each of the different soil cores and really just have some time for some open-ended exploration of the soil. And after they had time for that, we went into the tent and did a wrap up looking at those murals, thinking about how soil looks in different habitats, how does soil fit into the whole ecosystem while we were in there. And then while the students were out with us, the other half of the class was inside with a science specialist looking at some pre-dug soil of a meadow, so a different habitat. They did a lot of sketching. They tried to do some scaling of what they saw, so bring in some of those math concepts as well. So that was sort of the overview of our first school visits. And I'm going to turn it over to Nate and Joy so they can talk a little bit more about this. And they're going to talk a little bit about their research as well.
Awesome. Yeah. So my name's Nate Blais. Can you guys hear me? Using my headphones. Yeah. And me and Joy, we're both master's students here at the University of New Hampshire in soil scientists. And we actually study primarily permafrost. So I thought maybe we could give you a quick look at our research and then discuss our experience with the kids. This kid over here on the far right, it was one of my favorites that Joy's sitting with there. He was so cute. If you want to flip to the next slide real quick. Cool. So Joy and I study permafrost, or soils found in the Arctic that are permanently frozen, or permanently frozen at least a couple of years continuously. And we study microbial ecology here, so the bacteria that live in the soil. And we study two different aspects. Joy's thinking about permafrost as it thaws due to climate change, whereas I'm thinking about intact permafrost, so permafrost still frozen. And even though these systems are frozen, they still harbor pretty complex ecosystems that have impacts on how the broader Arctic ecosystem functions, both while the soil is still frozen and after thaw. And so I'll let Joy explain her little part first.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Okay. Awesome. Sometimes my audio goes in and out, but I'm Joy. I work with Nate here at UNH, and my research is primarily focused on understanding bacterial endospores, or dormant members of the permafrost microbiome. So cells and bacteria that may be essentially like asleep and dormant through time, especially in frozen soil, and then how they will react following permafrost thaw as our Earth is continually warming. So I made this little schematic here a while ago, but I thought it would be really awesome to include up on the top right. That is depicting a soil profile essentially, but we're going to pretend it's permafrost for a minute. And all of the little like yellow circles that you see there are representative of endospores. And that would be primarily because part of my hypothesis is that there will be more endospores present before the soil thaws versus after. And the reason I like to think about this is because after permafrost thaw occurs, there's a lot of nutrients and water and microbial activity that can come from permafrost thaw and those increasing temperatures. So I work more on a bacterial aspect of the permafrost microbiome, whereas Nate looks at more of the physical characteristics. So I'm going to turn it over to him really quick too. And then hopefully we'll circle back and talk about our experience with the soil tent and going to the schools. It's really awesome. I'm really excited to chat about that.
Yeah, so Joy looks at kind of the sleeping microbes in the permafrost. And I'm thinking more about the microbes that are active there currently in the frozen soil, and they experience some extreme conditions. So they're really interesting to me. And if you look down at the bottom left, we cracked open a permafrost core we're working with. And I draw your attention to a little magnifying glass, and then shift over to the right, where I have a reconstructed image of just a small portion of that permafrost. And so I do this with micro CT scanning, kind of like in a hospital, a CT scan, and I reconstruct what the permafrost is looking like, its physical structure. And so in the brown is the sediment, blue is ice, and the white is the pore space, so the empty air in the permafrost. In this pore space and the structure of these ice inclusions can have a big impact on where microbes are active in the soil, their distribution, and how much they can be active, because these dictate how much liquid water is there in the frozen soil, and that's really important into how active they are. And so that's just a little bit about what we do. And so our experience with, the kids outside with the tent and at the middle school is really awesome, because we're, as you can see, looking at pretty nitty gritty of the Arctic permafrost soil science, and we don't often get to think about soils from a more like holistic view, and especially thinking about them at home. And so it brings some really nice perspective to talk to the kids about the soils here in New Hampshire and around us, and how they formed and what they do, why they're important, why the kids should care. It kind of helps me remember too, why I got into thinking about soils. And it's kind of inspiring to me too, because the kids have like so much enthusiasm that maybe sometimes we lose about like the simplest things. Like we'll look under the microscope and I'll remember how cool it looks, like and you're just looking at like a soil grain with a little root or something, and like it's the coolest thing to them, and that's just like, I don't know, it's just pretty awesome. So it's been really great working with the kids and with Haley and everyone. And we've only been to a few schools so far, but I hope we get to keep going in the future and bring this to everyone. Anything you want to add, Joy?
Yeah, for sure. So I really enjoyed working with the students, and it's actually super refreshing. Kind of like Nate alluded, that they have so much enthusiasm, and I can bring that back to me in the lab and think of, this is exciting. Sometimes you get so bogged down, but really it is, everything that we do is exciting. And so working with the students and giving them the hands-on experience of working with like different coring tools and just allowing them to kind of explore on their own and have fun was awesome to be a part of. And I think the soil tent does a really good job of wrapping that all together, like what the kids learned and everything. Because not only did we talk like a little bit like technical, but then we got dirty and used a bunch of different tools. And I think one of like my favorite things is students like would walk away and say, I'm going to go look at the soil in my backyard, or I want to be a soil scientist. And obviously we want to raise awesome scientists. So that's it's a rewarding experience. And I think that any opportunity to be involved in it is really great.
Thank you very much, Nate and Joy. That was really interesting to hear more about your research, because I've only heard about it from a fourth grade perspective while we were talking to them. And Nate and Joy were just amazing with the kids and such great role models. So it was really awesome to have them there and their expertise on the soils. And the kids, they dig up a soil core and their minds were blown. It was just amazing how excited they would get about that. So I just want to take a little bit of time now briefly to talk about what we're working on now and into the future. And I'm sorry, can you hear me? I'm just going to ask that again okay, great. So with the soil tent, there are a few things that I've been working on this winter. One is trying to improve our implementation guides. The soil tent, there's so many options, and schools might use it in so many different ways based on whether they can dig outside their school, whether it's raining, how many adults they have. And so I've been trying to think a little bit about what we offer and how they can pick and choose what makes sense for their location. And I've been basing these implementation guides actually on some work that's been done by one of our partners, NASA Langley. And NASA Langley's been putting together these very nice pacing guides for educators for GLOBE and NASA materials. And they're so simple and comprehensive and clear. And so we're trying to use that model as we move forward with ours. The other thing we're working on is scheduling. We've had a lot of inquiries already about getting the tent out this spring, which is really exciting. There's been a lot of enthusiasm for it. And so working on how we're going to facilitate that. And then the really big piece is sustainability. How can we keep this program going? Nate and Joy are amazing, but they will not be graduate students forever. And so building these connections that can keep the program rolling. And one way we're doing that actually is through a new project related, which is the Earth Around Us project, where we will actually be using the same model to build a water tent. So we're really excited about this. This is again funded by the Forest Service. And so this time the activities will be based on the elementary storybook, Elementary Globe storybook, Discoveries at Willow Creek. And in this book, the theme is really seasonal changes. So in the book, the same students as the previous book go out and they notice differences in their creek between the spring and the fall. And so we're hoping with this tent that we can encourage schools and students to go out to whatever water body is near them and look for these seasonal changes. And so this time we're partnering again with the Forest Service, which has been wonderful. But we're also really excited to collaborate with our university's cooperative extension. And they have a STEM docent program, which is a program where volunteers bring STEM programming out to underrepresented populations. And so we will be training the docents both in the soil tent and in the water tent. And they're going to incorporate both of these things into programming they already do. So this is going to be, I think, a huge piece on keeping this program rolling into the future. And then I just want to leave with a couple of final thoughts about this model. I think the idea of kits or even a lending library of kits is not necessarily new, but it's a really neat idea and a neat program. And especially having the kit show up with a support person like Nate and Joy or like these STEM docents makes it really more accessible to a lot of different schools that might not have the time to put into the logistics of it. But I think what's really especially cool about this program actually is the tent itself. And there are a couple of things, there's really three things that as we went through this at the schools, I really noticed. And one is the artwork piece. And I didn't speak to that too much because we didn't actually work with the art teachers at these schools. But our hope is that schools would be inspired to have the art teacher or even the classroom teacher work with students to create similar artwork after they have this experience out with the tent. And Julie, the artist for the soil tent, was just so generous in sharing all of her materials and her methods and her methodology. So we're putting a document together that could be used by an art teacher to replicate that same process. The other thing that tent was really nice for, and Nate and Joy talked about this, was just centering the discussion around systems thinking. And we looked at kind of the different habitats and the difference, but also we thought a lot about how the soil interacts with what's above the ground. And as we wrapped up with the students, Nate posed the question to them, does the soil affect what's growing above the ground, or does what's growing above the ground affect how the soil develops? And having the students really think through that and hearing their ideas about that, I think was really valuable. And then the last thing about the tent is it's just really big and it's really visible. And it was set up right on the side of the playground, and so many teachers and students that were not involved stopped by. And I had second grade kids saying, oh, I hope you come back when I'm in fourth grade. And it really was a nice tool for generating interest and buy-in at the school and with the school community. And I know Ellen, the science specialist, was really hoping to use some of these activities just to get citizen science and Globe and these hands-on activities a bigger part of their science curriculum. And I think the tent itself was really a big part of that. So it was really awesome to have it up. And so I'm just going to end there. And I have just thank you all for being here with us, especially thanks to Nate and Joy for your time with us today and also with the students. Thanks to the whole soil tent team. They've been phenomenal working with them. And then thanks to Ellen Irvin, because she really actually spent a lot of time with me giving me ideas and suggestions with kind of her educator lens, which was really helpful as we got off the ground in schools with this project. And so now we have a few more minutes. If I would love to hear any ideas you have, suggestions, connections, and I will put our website in. We have a website where Julie actually outlines her whole process, and you can see a lot more about how the tent was developed and some of our activities. And I'll put that in the chat. And so I'm actually going to get, Jen is asking, Andy, if you could talk a little bit about creating the tent. So maybe we'll just start there.
Sure, I can say a few words about that. So you heard from Nate and Joy. They were working with the students. That is very similar to what I did when we were originally starting this process. However, it was drawn out a little bit more over a couple of days versus just the one-time visits. Initially, we had the globe materials go in early, and the teachers would work with the students to get them some background knowledge in soils and give them the worksheets and that kind of stuff. And then I came in the following day, and I was with the artist at that point, and we went out in the field with the students, dug the holes like Joy and Nate did, and then we talked about spelling out their worksheets. Then the artist was with me during that and taking photos and talking with the students too. And then after I finished up with my session, the artist then went in with the students, and I was in there in the morning, and then the artist was in with them in the afternoon, and she started to work with them to capture. She put out drawing paper all over the floors, and this is where the art teacher came into play also, and they started to work over those sheets out on the floor and trying to have the students, what they viewed in their eyes, put it down onto paper. And then afterwards, the artist then took those sheets that were actually duplicates made. The artist took pictures of them, and then the school got to keep the originals, and they got hung up on the walls, which was really cool. So the students got to have, something physical and got to be a part of the process. And then the artists and myself, we then worked on what the students had produced and then put a more grown-up structure to it, which is what we ended up with the 3 panels that you saw at the very beginning. That's the images and the images and the different things that you see in it. That was a lot of what the students saw, but then we put the structure with it, with the profiles and putting animals in the right place and that kind of stuff. But this all came from what they saw when they were in the field with me digging the holes. So like the one picture where it's got the little bunny rabbit down in the hole. Well, when we dug the hole, there actually was a little mouse hole at the time, and so that's where that came from. And then they interpreted mice with a bunny rabbits, and that's where it came up with that type of image. And so it was a really fun process, and I got a lot of enjoyment out of it. Just as what Joy and Nate were saying, the enjoyment they got from working with the students, it was really refreshing. And they gave me a newfound interest in what it was that I do on a daily basis, why it's important. So hopefully that's enough.
Thanks, Andy. If you have other questions or connections, feel free to type in the chat or even just unmute.
So Haley, this is Elena.
Hi, Elena.
So it looks like you had also some soil profiles on paper. Did students make their own soil profiles?
Yes. So this is one of the. I'm just going to back up. Are you looking at this picture?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So this is an activity from the NRCS, which is is that right? Natural Resources Conservation Services. And so it's little pieces of carpet tape on paper, and they take the actual soil and they
Yep.
mimic what they see in the profile to make their own small version. So these came from the work that Andy did with the students, and it's some of the materials that we offer in our kit that they can put that together.
Yeah, because that's something useful when, especially when it's winter and you can't dig outside, but they can still look at the profile and, you know, see the different layers, horizons,
Yes.
soil horizons. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's a really interesting idea too, because this winter we haven't been bringing it out because the soil's all frozen, but they could be
Right.
doing some of these other activities.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I like that.
Well, and that was the point of what some of this was when we originally developed it was some of the tent's thought was that it would go to areas that didn't have the opportunity to get kids out in the out in the soil. If they if their parking lot, if their school was all paved over or something like that, and we couldn't
Right.
get them out into an area where they could dig a hole, we had these activities. And the murals could be something so they could get that vision and then be able to do the activities and feel like they're digging a hole or something like that.
Right. Neat. Yep.
And I would say, Haley talked about the next edition of the tent going with more of the ecosystems and bringing hydrology into it. I really hope that we're able to bring the artist component back into it because it was really from a student perspective, they got a lot from it, and the teacher responses that we got from it was just amazing. It was a really wonderful experience.
Yeah, and so for these, am I muted? No. So for this water tent, we will be working with the art teachers too, instead of the artists in residence. And so they'll be, that will be built in, that they'll be actually working with their art teacher and following this process. And I'm hoping that that will, especially if they can share some on that experience, it will inspire other schools to do that process too, as they use the water tent or the soil tent, that art teacher can be more involved. Thanks, Susan just shared an article, a Forest Service publication of why trees grow where they do in New Hampshire forests. So that's awesome, and that's something we should pull into our materials too to share as we bring the tent out.
You might mention too that Elena, back to when you were asking the question of if they don't have the opportunity to get in the field, we actually had a second set of panels made because the tent, as Haley pointed out, is really big. It takes a big space, and so if you're not able to get it outside, we actually had made 8x8 panels that you can hang on a wall, and so you can make it make a classroom into an outdoor scene if you wanted to. Also, we haven't had the experience yet of using them, which I hope that we're able to at some points. But that was the thought of why we had the second set of panels made, so that you could use it without the tent, and if the weather was bad or something like that.
We might borrow it. Because right now it's impossible to dig into the soil. It's warmed up to 6 below or 11 below, but no way that we're going to dig into it.
Yep.
And we had this, you'd have to do some, I don't know how feasible this would be, but we did have a good luck digging up some soil cores, and Jen actually came up with the idea of putting them into pieces of gutter like you have on your house.
Yep.
And so we put some soil cores in the gutters, and the students looked at those inside,
Right.
and were able to make sketches and do some of the activities. So that's another way to get the soil into them.
Yeah.
So what advice would you have if we want one? Is this can be duplicated, meaning the panels?
Andy, I'll let you speak to that since you printed them.
Yeah, the panels now are a digital image, and I worked with the tint maker, and when they made the top, so the frame, you can switch out the frame. The top comes off, the sides come off, and you just have the metal frame. And it was done that way so that's over time. You know, if you're using it a lot, it's gonna, you know, the panels will wear out because they are a vinyl clad type weather resistant panel, but you know, they just wear out over time. And so it was designed so you could replace them. The panels are now a digital image, and when the sides were made, they actually imprinted the image onto the panel itself. So it's yeah, it can be recreated whenever it needs to be.
Thank you.
You know, we'd really like to think about this in replicating the whole process of working with an artist and, you know, kind of doing your own panels, or like Haley and Andy said, the students did their own panels and the artists kind of pulled them all together for the tent panels, but they had their own murals that they kept at the school. And so, you know, kind of thinking about this, you know, replicating around the country, you know, I'd like to see, you know, how we can foster this, not necessarily kind of taking this particular tent and these particular panels, but how does that replicate kind of in the bigger picture of you're developing panels that are more relevant to the space that you're in, you know, wherever you are in the country, and how that relates. Like the Southwest, you know, you might want to have some desert soil or, you know, something like that. So it would be great to have you folks kind of help us think through that, like how that would play out. But at the same time, like Andy said, these are digital panels, and you know, you can kind of start with these if you want, and kind of go from there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential. So now I'll speak on the on what Susan's bringing up. I think there's a lot of potential there to have a gallery of different soil types by students potentially across the country in, you know, Globe partners. So here's what this soil looks like in Alaska, and here's one that what it looks like in Arizona. And here's another one from California in this area. And here's one, be super cool to have one from the rainforest or up in, what is it, the northwest there. So it'd be really cool to have some sort of gallery of those that people could download and use. But on the website, we've made it really easy to replicate the process. So the artist spells out how she did it. We have resources on all of that in case you wanted to go through the whole process. And then we also have the list of things that are in the soil tent itself and those kits. So, you know, with the pacing guide, the list of materials, and then the downloadable images that we have, you could replicate the whole thing and you know, add to your repertoire of what you do normally, or you can expand on that and go through the whole process if you wanted. So we want to make it as easy as possible for you to do either one. But I think we could definitely find a place on our website to have a gallery of soils if you do come up with those murals, and add those and have a description of where they came from and the school that did it and things like that. So
Yeah, that's a wonderful idea. And like in Alaska, there are many different ecosystems that could be represented. You know, the tundra, the boreal forest, the rainforest, and so yeah, and we'll have definitely different soil profiles to look at. And we also have in the long-term ecological research program that we have, we work with artists. There's a LTR, Bonanza Creek LTR investigator they invite artists into the field. And so this might be could be one of their projects if they wanted to. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be a great opportunity. And from a cost standpoint, this wasn't an expensive thing to put together. The major cost was the artist that we had paid her salary when she was doing it. But now that the process is set up and all that, and you can do it from a partner standpoint, it's the materials are not that was not the expensive part.
Right. Yeah. So when are you going to start on the water tent?
We have.
You have?
We're started in getting ready so we'll go through the same phase. One will be development of the tent itself.
Right.
So we're just starting to pull together our ideas for that, and what materials we'll need. And then we're recruiting right now schools to work with to do that initial development.
Mm-hmm.
And then hopefully not this spring, but the next spring, we can start training the STEM docents and getting the programming out. So yeah, it's very exciting.
It is.
Yeah. And then we can all get our gallery of water imagery up too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that idea. That's awesome.
I just want to say that working with Nate and Joy and just seeing the students look to them as just these, really seeing them doing this in the field and how excited they were about soil. It really conveyed itself to the students. And then the fact that the students were excited, I mean, they just did not want to stop digging at all. It was really neat to see. So there was definitely, again, we were so lucky. I'm so grateful for Joy and Nate and their contribution to this project. It just took it just to a different level, right? Because the students would look at me and I looked like their teacher, right? But this was somebody who they were like, wow, they went to school for this. This is really neat. Like, you can do soil and have this much fun as a career, right? So I think that he made a huge impact.
Yeah, I had a few students come up to me and be like, "You get paid to go get dirty every day?"
Yeah, that would be really cool if if the network builds out, around the country and more people have tents and things, that we have a network of like soil scientists around that, that are interested in volunteering so that they can accompany the tent. Because I don't think it's not necessary, but I'm sure it enhances it a lot for the students.
Definitely.